Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. September 2017 found me cleaning cabins on the Norwegian Spirit, somewhere between Juneau and Skagway. I'd been a cabin attendant for 3 weeks at that point, still getting used to the 12-hour shifts and the constant motion of the ship beneath my feet. Most people dream about Alaska cruises from the passenger side: glaciers, whales, 5-course dinners. From the crew side, it's fluorescent-lit corridors that smell like industrial cleaner, shared bunks 4 levels below the waterline, and the same 20 faces in the mess hall every single day. My section covered rooms 401 through 420 on Deck 4, all balcony suites, which meant better tips but way more demanding guests who expected their towel animals to be perfect and their minibars restocked twice daily. Room 414 started giving me problems on a Thursday morning. Mrs. Gibson, a retired teacher from Phoenix traveling alone, pulled me aside in the hallway with this concerned expression that immediately told me something was wrong. She was maybe 70, wore these thick purple-framed glasses, and had that way of talking where she touched your arm every few sentences like she needed to make sure you were really listening. She said her balcony door kept opening on its own during the night, even though she distinctly remembered locking it before bed. The wind would wake her up at 3 or 4 in the morning, these icy gusts from the Alaskan waters just flooding her room. I assured her I'd check the lock mechanism, thinking maybe the ship's movement was jostling something loose, or the salt air had corroded the latch. That afternoon, I spent 20 minutes in 414 testing everything. The lock clicked firmly into place, the deadbolt slid smooth as butter, and the balcony door handle had zero give when I yanked on it from outside. I even checked the door frame for warping, ran my fingers along the weather stripping, tested if the ship's vibration could somehow trigger the mechanism. Nothing. Everything functioned perfectly. I left a maintenance request anyway, just to cover myself, and told Mrs. Gibson we'd replace the lock. We hadn't, but sometimes the placebo effect works wonders with anxious passengers. She seemed satisfied, even tipped me an extra 20 for being thorough. I figured that would be the end of it. 2 nights later, Mrs. Gibson was gone. Her cruise ended in Skagway, and the Johnsons from Michigan moved into 414. Harold and Vivian, mid-60s, celebrating their 40th anniversary. They seemed like the type who'd been on dozens of cruises, knew exactly how much to pack, which excursions were worth it, where to find the good coffee on board that wasn't $8 a cup. Harold wore these loud Hawaiian shirts every day, a different pattern, but always featuring parrots or pineapples. Vivian kept her silver hair in this perfect bob that never moved despite the deck winds. They were friendly enough, always asked about my family when I came to clean, remembered I was from Ohio. On their second night, I got a call from Harold at 6 a.m., right when I was starting my shift. The balcony door was wide open again, but that wasn't the worst part. Harold said they'd both woken up around 2 a.m. to this smell, like wet dog mixed with something metallic, he described it. Vivian thought maybe a seal or sea lion had somehow gotten onto their balcony, which would have been impossible at our cruising speed, but passengers always have wild theories. The smell lasted maybe 10 minutes, then vanished completely, but they couldn't get back to sleep after that. Harold mentioned feeling watched, said Vivian kept checking the bathroom and closet. They were both pretty shaken, and these weren't the type to spook easily. I promised to have maintenance do a deep inspection while they were at breakfast, even though I knew they'd find nothing, just like before. My supervisor, Craig, was getting annoyed with the repeated complaints about 414. He was this former Navy guy from Texas, treated the cruise ship like a military operation, everything by the book. He suggested maybe I wasn't locking the door properly during cleaning, which pissed me off, because I'd been doing this job long enough to know how to secure a damn door. But Craig had been with the company for 15 years, had connections all the way up to corporate, so I just nodded and said I'd be extra careful. That same day, the Johnsons asked to change rooms. We moved them to 408. Told them there'd been a minor ventilation issue in 414. The lie came easy. In this job, you learn to smooth things over, keep the passengers happy, maintain the illusion that everything's perfect on their dream vacation. Room 414 stayed empty for one night due to a booking mix-up, which gave me a chance to really investigate. After my regular shift ended at 8 p.m., I told Craig I was grabbing dinner, but instead I went back to deck 4. I had this weird feeling about that room, couldn't explain it, just knew something was wrong. The hallway was quieter than usual. Most passengers were at the comedy show in the main theater. I let myself into 414 with my master key and just sat there in the dark for a while, waiting. The room felt normal enough, maybe a little colder than the others, but that could have been my imagination. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, that distinctive shuffle of someone who's not quite awake. Through the peephole, I saw a man from 416, Mr. Carlson, standing in the corridor wearing just boxers and a t-shirt. No shoes, his feet probably freezing on that industrial carpet. Mr. Carlson was traveling with his wife and teenage daughter, seemed like a regular suburban dad, coached Little League type, probably had a garage full of half-finished woodworking projects. But standing there in the hallway, he looked different. His eyes were open but unfocused, like he was seeing something that wasn't there. He walked straight to the door of 414 and just stood there, facing it, maybe 6 inches away. Didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood perfectly still. I watched him through the peephole for what must have been 5 full minutes, barely breathing myself, wondering if I should open the door and check if he was okay. His lips were moving slightly, like he was whispering something, but I couldn't make out any words. Then at exactly midnight, according to my phone, he turned around and walked back to 416, went inside, and I heard the soft click of his door closing. The next morning, I made sure to be cleaning 416 when the Carlsons went to breakfast. Mr. Carlson looked completely normal, joking with his daughter about the whale-watching tour they'd booked, complaining good-naturedly about the coffee prices. I casually mentioned that I'd been doing some late-night maintenance in the hallway, asked if the noise had disturbed them. He looked genuinely confused, said they'd all slept like rocks. Best night's sleep of the whole cruise, actually. His wife confirmed it, said the motion of the ship usually kept her up, but last night she was out cold from 10 to 7. Their daughter, maybe 15 with braces and that awkward teenage posture, was buried in her phone but mumbled agreement. None of them had any memory of Mr. Carlson leaving the room. That's when I started keeping a log. Every night after my shift, I'd spend my break in the supply closet near 414, watching through the crack in the door. Night 3, Mrs. Brenner from 412, 70-something widow from Boston, stood at 414's door from 11:58 p.m. to 12:03 a.m., her gray hair wild from sleep, muttering what sounded like numbers. Night 4, a kid, maybe 8 years old, from 418, barefoot in dinosaur pajamas, pressing his palms flat against 414's door while his parents slept 3 rooms away. Night 5, 2 different people, Mr. Carlson again, and a woman from 410 I hadn't met yet, standing on either side of 414's door like guards, both swaying slightly with the ship's movement. Every single time they'd show up just before midnight, do their strange ritual, then return to their rooms with no memory of it the next day. I finally worked up the nerve to check 414's history in the ship's database. Had to bribe Danny from IT with a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving, but he got me access to the incident reports. Turns out 3 years earlier, a passenger named Eugene Whitfield had been found dead in 414. 62 years old, traveling alone, discovered by housekeeping after he missed 2 days of meals. The official cause was listed as a heart attack, but the notes mentioned he'd been found on the balcony at noon, despite having died around midnight according to the coroner's estimate. His body was in a kneeling position, facing the ocean, arms stretched out like he was reaching for something. The crew member who found him said the smell was unbearable, not just death but something else, something chemical. Security footage from that night showed nothing unusual. Eugene entering his room at 10 p.m. and never leaving. But here's what made my skin prickle. They found scratch marks on the inside of the balcony door, deep gouges in the wood like he'd been trying to claw his way back inside. I should have reported everything to Craig, should have insisted they close 414 permanently, or at least investigate properly. But cruise lines don't work that way. Every empty room is lost revenue. Every incident is potential bad publicity. Plus, who'd believe me? Passengers sleepwalking to a specific door at midnight sounded insane even to me. Instead, I started leaving 414's balcony door slightly open before midnight. Just a crack, barely noticeable. My theory was maybe Eugene's spirit or energy or whatever you want to call it was trapped, trying to get back in, using other passengers as conduits. The strange thing was, it actually worked. The sleepwalking stopped immediately. No more midnight visitors, no more complaints about the smell or feeling watched. The room still felt wrong to me, heavy somehow, but at least people weren't being drawn to it anymore. I finished my contract 2 months later and never went back to cruise work. Got a job at a Marriott in Columbus, boring as hell, but at least the rooms stay where they're supposed to. Sometimes I Google the Norwegian Spirit, check cruise forums to see if anyone mentions room 414. Found one post from last year, a woman complaining that her balcony door wouldn't stay closed, kept finding it open every morning despite locking it multiple times. The cruise line responded with some corporate nonsense about investigating the matter, ensuring passenger comfort, the usual script. But I know what's really happening. Every night at midnight, something in that room needs to get out, needs to reach the ocean, needs to complete whatever Eugene was trying to do in his final moments. And some poor cabin attendant is probably discovering what I discovered, making the same choice I made, leaving that door cracked open and hoping nobody asks too many questions. I still dream about it sometimes. That hallway, those sleepwalking passengers, their blank eyes and shuffling feet. In the dreams, I'm the one standing at 414's door at midnight, my hand reaching for the handle, my mouth moving in silent words I can't understand. I always wake up right before the door opens, drenched in sweat, checking my phone to make sure it's not midnight. Part of me wonders if Eugene had the same dreams before his trip, if something called him to that specific room, that specific fate. But mostly I try not to think about it. Some doors, I've learned, are meant to stay open, even when every instinct tells you to lock them tight and throw away the key. I worked security on cruise ships for 12 years before that night in the Mediterranean changed everything. It was late August 2018, and I was stationed aboard the Celestial Dream, one of those floating cities that promised paradise to 3,000 passengers willing to pay for it. My shift ran from midnight to 8 in the morning, monitoring the endless maze of corridors and decks through 36 different camera feeds. Most nights, I'd see nothing more exciting than drunk passengers stumbling back to their cabins or the occasional couple sneaking into the pool after hours. That particular night started like any other. Me, a thermos of black coffee, and the soft glow of monitors in the security office tucked away on Deck 3. The ship was somewhere between Santorini and Malta, cutting through calm waters under a moonless sky. I remember the exact time because I'd just logged it in my report. 2:47 a.m., when I first noticed her on camera 14, the one covering the portside promenade on Deck 7. She was wearing this flowing white sundress that caught my attention immediately, not because it was unusual, but because of how she moved in it. The woman kept pulling at the hem, wrapping her arms around herself, then unwrapping them, looking behind her every few steps like she expected someone to materialize from the shadows. Her hair, this distinctive auburn color that looked almost burgundy under the deck lights, whipped around her face in the sea breeze. I zoomed in slightly, following protocol to assess if a passenger might need assistance. She walked the entire length of the promenade twice, her pace irregular, sometimes quick and purposeful, other times slowing to an almost complete stop. At one point, she gripped the railing and leaned forward, staring down at the black water below for what must have been a full minute. I reached for my radio, ready to dispatch someone to check on her, but then she stepped back, smoothed down her dress, and continued walking. The way she kept checking her phone, the screen lighting up her face with this harsh blue glow, made me think she was waiting for someone, or maybe having one of those late-night arguments couples have on vacation when the romance doesn't quite live up to the brochure. Around 3:15 a.m., a man appeared on the same camera feed. Tall guy, maybe 6'2", wearing khaki shorts and a navy polo that looked freshly pressed even at that ungodly hour. He had this particular way of walking, shoulders back, chin up, like he was perpetually posing for a yacht club photo. I recognized him immediately as one half of the couple from cabin 8247, one of those luxury suites with the private balconies that cost more than I made in 3 months. They'd been on board since Barcelona, always ate at the captain's table, tipped the staff generously, the kind of passengers crew members remember because they never complain and always smile. He approached the woman slowly, and I watched her whole body language shift. Her shoulders dropped, she stopped fidgeting with her dress, but she also took this tiny step backward that most people wouldn't notice. When he reached her, he put his hand on her lower back, that possessive gesture some men do, and they started walking together toward the stern. She kept her arms crossed the entire time, her head turned slightly away from him, looking out at the water instead of at her husband. I switched between cameras to keep them in view. Camera 14 to 15, then 16 as they moved aft. They stopped near the very back of the ship, where the deck narrows and the railing is lower, right by the emergency equipment lockers. This area has always made me nervous because the cameras don't overlap perfectly there. There's about a 12-foot section where you can only see people from one angle, and if they move close to the railing, their lower bodies get cut off from view. The husband was doing most of the talking, his hands moving in these controlled, measured gestures, while she just stood there, occasionally nodding. At 3:28 a.m., she suddenly turned to walk away, but he caught her wrist, not aggressively, just firm enough to stop her. They stood like that for maybe 30 seconds, him still talking, her looking down at where his hand gripped her arm. Then she said something. I could see her mouth moving rapidly, almost like she was pleading, and he let go. She immediately walked out of frame, heading toward the port side, and he followed about 10 feet behind. That's when I made my first mistake. I didn't switch cameras fast enough to see where they went next. Got distracted by a drunk passenger vomiting in a stairwell on deck 5 that required immediate attention. By the time I got back to tracking them, maybe 3 minutes later, I caught the husband on camera 18, walking alone near the midship elevators. His clothes looked exactly the same, not a wrinkle, not a hair out of place. But something about his walk was different now, looser, more relaxed, like someone who just finished a workout and was cooling down. He pressed the elevator button, waited precisely 15 seconds, I counted, then took the stairs instead, heading up toward the Lido deck. I scanned through all the port side cameras looking for the woman in the white dress, figuring she'd gone back to their cabin another way. Camera 12, nothing. Camera 13, empty corridor. Camera 14, where I'd first seen her. Just the empty promenade and the occasional spray of seawater hitting the deck. I pulled up the interior cameras next, checked the ladies' rooms on that level, the 24-hour cafe that stayed open for insomniacs and party stragglers. She wasn't anywhere. At 3:41 a.m., I made a note in my log that I'd lost visual on a female passenger. Standard procedure, when someone exits camera coverage without returning to their cabin. The husband showed up on my monitors again at 4:05 a.m., this time at the casino bar on deck 8. He ordered what looked like whiskey neat, I could tell by the way the bartender poured it, and sat there sipping it slowly while scrolling through his phone. Nothing about his behavior suggested anything unusual. He even laughed at something on his screen, showed it to the bartender who smiled politely. After finishing his drink, he walked back to cabin 8247, used his key card, and disappeared inside. I kept expecting to see the woman in the white dress appear on one of my screens, maybe coming from the spa area or the library, somewhere the cameras don't cover every angle, but she never did. At 6:15 a.m., Just as the sun was starting to paint the horizon this pale orange color, the husband emerged from his cabin again. This time he was wearing running gear, those expensive athletic shorts with the reflective strips and a moisture-wicking shirt. He did a full circuit of the jogging track on deck 11, maintaining a steady pace for exactly 45 minutes. When he passed other early morning joggers, he'd give them this friendly little wave, the perfect image of a health-conscious passenger enjoying his Mediterranean vacation. My shift was almost over when the call came in at 7:42 a.m. The husband, now dressed in crisp linen pants and a white button-down, was at the guest services desk reporting his wife missing. Even from the camera angle above the desk, I could see his performance, the way he ran his fingers through his hair repeatedly, how he kept touching his wedding ring, spinning it around his finger while he talked. The duty manager called up to security immediately, and suddenly my quiet night became a circus. The husband's story was simple. His wife, Isabel, had gone for a walk around 3 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. He'd tried to go with her, but she insisted she needed some time alone to clear her head. They'd been having some minor disagreements about their next port of call, nothing serious. He went back to their cabin to wait, dozed off, and when he woke up at 7, she still hadn't returned. Her side of the bed was untouched, her phone was going straight to voicemail, and her passport was still in the cabin safe. The tears that rolled down his cheeks looked so genuine that even the duty manager put a comforting hand on his shoulder. I pulled all the footage from 2:30 a.m. onward and brought it to the security chief's office. We sat there watching it together on the main screen while 2 other officers began coordinating a ship-wide search. When we got to the part where the couple was at the stern, near those emergency lockers, the chief asked me to replay it 3 times. Each time we watched the husband's hand on her back, the way she tried to leave, how he grabbed her wrist. But the chief just shrugged, looked like a standard marital spat to him, the kind they see a dozen times per cruise. Then I showed him something else. At 3:31 a.m., right after the couple walked out of camera 16's view, there was this tiny splash visible in camera 17, which covers the wake behind the ship. Just a small disturbance in the water, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Could have been anything, a wave, a seabird, someone throwing a cigarette overboard. But then at 3:33 a.m., the husband appeared again on camera 18, and if you looked closely, really closely, his right pocket seemed heavier than before, pulling slightly on that side of his shorts. When he'd first appeared at 3:15, both pockets had been flat against his legs. The search went on for 6 hours. Every cabin, every storage room, every possible space where a person could be. They even sent crew members to check inside the lifeboats and behind the industrial equipment in areas passengers never see. The Coast Guard was notified, and we had to reduce speed while they conducted their protocols. Meanwhile, the husband, his name was Jonathan, I learned from the passenger manifest, put on this masterclass in grief. He helped with the search, knocked on doors with the crew, called out Isabel's name until his voice went hoarse. When they brought him back to the security office to review his statement, he broke down completely, had to be given water and tissues. He kept saying the same things over and over. She'd been stressed about her work back home. She'd been taking sleeping pills, but they made her feel foggy. Sometimes she'd go for walks to clear her head. He mentioned she'd been talking about wanting to see the sunrise from the deck. Maybe she'd leaned too far over the railing. The way he delivered each line, with these perfectly timed pauses and voice cracks, reminded me of my brother who did community theater. Technically perfect, but somehow rehearsed. At 2 p.m., after the captain made the announcement that we had a missing passenger and asked everyone to check their areas, I went back to the footage one more time on my own. This time, I focused on the 20 minutes after I'd lost them on camera 16. At 3:34 a.m., there was something I'd missed before. On camera 22, which covers the service corridor behind the pool area, a figure walked past carrying something white bundled under their arm. The quality was terrible because that's one of our older cameras, but the height and build matched Jonathan. The white bundle could have been towels, could have been a bathrobe from the spa, or it could have been a white sundress. At 3:38 a.m., That same figure appeared on camera 24 near the incinerator chute that crew members use for garbage from the restaurants. They stood there for exactly 43 seconds, then walked away empty-handed. I tried to enhance the image, even borrowed a laptop from IT to run it through better software, but the resolution just wasn't there. All I had was a pixelated ghost who might or might not have been throwing evidence into an incinerator that reaches 1,000 degrees Celsius. I brought everything to the chief again: the splash, the heavy pocket, the figure with the white bundle, the incinerator timing. He looked at me like I'd been drinking on duty. The splash could have been anything. Pockets can look different depending on the camera angle, and half the crew uses that service corridor at night. Without clear footage, without a body, without any real evidence, all we had was a woman who'd tragically fallen overboard, probably while her husband slept. The investigators who came aboard in Malta interviewed everyone, including me. I told them what I'd seen, showed them the footage I'd flagged. They took notes, nodded politely, and focused their questions on Isabel's mental state instead. Jonathan had already given them her psychiatrist's contact information, proof she'd been treated for anxiety and insomnia. He'd even found a note in her journal about feeling trapped, though when I asked to see the actual journal, they said it was personal evidence. By the time we docked, the official story was already written. Tragic accident, troubled woman, Mediterranean cruise turns to nightmare. Jonathan left the ship surrounded by sympathetic crew members who'd pooled together money for a condolence gift. But here's what haunts me, what made me quit that job 3 months later, and still keeps me up some nights. When I was packing up Isabel's belongings for Jonathan, standard procedure for missing passenger cases, I found her sleeping pills in the bathroom, a full bottle, prescription dated just 2 days before the cruise. 30 pills, and 30 were still there. Her phone, which Jonathan said she'd taken with her, found it wedged between the mattress and headboard, like it had fallen while she was sleeping. And that jewelry he'd thrown overboard at 3:31, because I know now that's what it was, probably her wedding ring, maybe a necklace, something to make it look like she'd gone into the water. The investigators said these details didn't change anything. Lots of people forget to take their medication. Phones fall all the time. But I know what I saw in those cameras. I know the difference between a man whose wife just tragically died and a man who just got away with murder. Jonathan knew exactly where our camera blind spots were, knew the incinerator schedule, knew that without a body, maritime law made everything complicated. I still check news stories from his hometown sometimes, wondering if he'll remarry, if he's already planning another cruise. Because guys like him, they don't stop at one. The Atlantic was eerily calm that April night in 2022, when everything I thought I knew about maritime safety came crashing down around me. I was working as a junior communications officer aboard the Meridian Star, one of those massive repositioning cruises that ferry passengers from Florida to Europe when the season changes. At 26, I'd only been with the company for 8 months, still green enough that the senior officers called me rookie, but experienced enough to handle the graveyard shift alone. The ship was carrying about 1,800 passengers, mostly retirees taking advantage of the cheaper repositioning rates, and by 2 a.m., the entire vessel felt like a floating ghost town. I remember sitting in the communications room on Deck 9, monitoring the usual channels while sipping my 4th cup of coffee that shift, when the first transmission came through, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. The voice was barely a whisper through the static, like someone speaking through layers of wet fabric, repeating the same thing over and over. Mayday, Mayday, this is position 27.4 north, 63.8 west. Please, anyone. They're taking on water. I immediately sat up straighter, adjusting the frequency dial with practiced precision, trying to clear up the signal. According to protocol, any distress call requires immediate action, so I grabbed the logbook and started recording everything while simultaneously pulling up our navigation charts. The coordinates placed the source about 40 nautical miles southeast of our current position, close enough that we could potentially assist if needed. But here's where things got strange. When I tried to respond to establish communication, my transmission seemed to hit a wall of interference. The voice kept repeating, growing more desperate with each loop, and I noticed something that made the hair on my arms stand up. The person never identified their vessel, just kept saying, "This is," followed by static, as if the ship's name was being deliberately obscured. Following standard procedure, I contacted the bridge immediately to report the distress signal. Lieutenant Commander Reeves answered after 3 rings, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. When I explained the situation, playing back the recording I'd started making, he went quiet for a long moment before telling me to run a verification check with the Coast Guard and MRCC Atlantic. I did exactly that, sending out queries to every maritime authority in the region, but their responses all came back the same. No vessels reported missing or in distress at those coordinates, no emergency beacons activated, nothing on their radar. Reeves called back 20 minutes later, and I could hear other senior officers in the background. Apparently, I'd woken up half the command structure. He told me it was probably just atmospheric interference bouncing old transmissions around, something that happens occasionally over deep water, and to log it as a false alarm. But the voice was still coming through my headset, clearer now, and I could hear other sounds behind it. Metal groaning, water rushing, people screaming in what sounded like Portuguese or Spanish. I couldn't just ignore it, not when every instinct I had was screaming that something was terribly wrong. After Reeves hung up, I made a decision that probably should have gotten me fired. I started my own investigation. First, I pulled up historical maritime data for those exact coordinates, using the ship's archived navigation database that went back nearly 50 years. What I found made my mouth go dry. On May 15, 1976, a cruise liner called the Estrella Pacifica had sent out a distress call from those exact coordinates, 27.4 north, 63.8 west, before vanishing without a trace. All 247 souls on board were never found. No wreckage was ever recovered, and the investigation was closed after 6 months with no conclusive explanation. The official report, which I managed to access through our company's internal network, blamed it on a rogue wave, but the weather that night had been completely calm, just like tonight. The distress calls continued for another hour, growing more frantic and layered. Multiple voices now overlapping in different languages, all broadcasting from those same coordinates. I recorded everything on my personal phone, knowing the ship's official recordings would probably be deleted or lost if this turned into something bigger. Around 3:30 a.m., I noticed something else in the ship's database that made me physically push back from my desk. Our parent company, Meridian Cruise Lines, had acquired its fleet in 1977, just 1 year after the Estrella Pacifica disappeared. The previous owner? Pacific Star Ventures, the same company that had operated the Estrella Pacifica. Even more disturbing, 3 of our current board members had been executives at Pacific Star during the time of the disappearance. I started downloading everything I could find, transferring files to my personal laptop, when suddenly all the screens in the communications room went black for about 10 seconds before flickering back to life. When the systems came back online, the distress signal had changed. Now there was just one voice, crystal clear, speaking in accented English. They knew we were sinking. They knew, and they left us here. The Meridian directors. They cut our communications, disabled our beacons. Insurance fraud. Please, someone needs to know the truth. Check the maintenance logs for April 1976. Check the transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched tone that made me rip off my headset. My nose was bleeding. I didn't even realize it until I felt the warm drip on my uniform. I grabbed tissues while frantically trying to restore the connection, but the frequency was dead. That's when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, which was unusual because nobody ever came up to Deck 9 during the night shift, except for hourly security rounds, and the next one wasn't due for another 40 minutes. The door to the communications room opened slowly. and in walked Chief Communications Officer Garrett, a man who typically worked day shifts and whom I'd only met twice during my entire employment. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a wrinkled polo shirt, like he'd been roused from bed and threw on whatever was nearby. His face had this practiced calm that didn't match the urgency in his eyes, and he was carrying a tablet that he kept glancing at nervously. "Aaron," he said, using my first name for the first time ever, "I heard you've been picking up some unusual interference tonight. Mind if I take a look at your logs?" The way he said it wasn't really a question. I handed him the official logbook, but I could tell he was more interested in seeing what was on my computer screen. He scrolled through the entries, occasionally making small humming sounds, then asked me to play back the recordings from the ship's system. Of course, when I tried to access them, they were gone. Every single transmission from the last 3 hours had been wiped clean, showing nothing but normal channel monitoring. Garrett's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Must have been a system glitch," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "Happens sometimes with all the satellite interference out here. I'll need you to write up an incident report stating that you experienced technical anomalies, but nothing of concern was found upon investigation." He pulled out a pre-written template on his tablet, already filled out with most of the details, just waiting for my signature. That's when I knew for certain that this went all the way to the top. They'd been monitoring my access to the database, watching me discover the connections, and now they were here to clean it up. I signed the report. What else could I do? But I made sure to take a photo of it with my phone when Garrett looked away for a second. He collected the official logbook, told me to take the rest of the night off, and suggested I might enjoy working on one of our Mediterranean routes after this crossing. Maybe take some vacation time. Think about my future with the company. I left the communications room knowing they'd be watching me now, but I couldn't let it go. Not with those voices still echoing in my head. Not with 247 people who never got justice. Over the next 2 days, I acted completely normal during my shifts, but at night, I used the passenger Wi-Fi on my personal laptop to research everything I could about the Estrella Pacifica. I found an old conspiracy forum where someone claiming to be a former Pacific Star employee had posted in 2008 about falsified maintenance records and deliberately compromised hull integrity on several vessels for insurance payouts. The post mentioned that the Estrella Pacifica was supposed to develop a controlled leak that would force an evacuation near a busy shipping lane, but something went catastrophically wrong. The user disappeared after 3 posts, their account deleted, but other users had screenshot everything. I also found obituaries for 2 other Pacific Star executives from 1976 who died in separate accidents within weeks of the Estrella Pacifica disaster. Both had been vocal about investigating discrepancies in the company's fleet maintenance. On my final night shift before reaching Barcelona, around 1 a.m., the signals returned stronger than ever. This time I could hear individual voices clearly. A woman singing a lullaby in Portuguese to calm someone, a man praying in Latin, children crying for their parents. But the most chilling was a calm male voice that spoke directly to me. "Aaron Blackwood, Junior Communications Officer, Employee ID 7739. We know you're listening. We know you've seen the truth. Don't let them bury us twice." The fact that they knew my full name and employee ID made my entire body go cold. I'd never transmitted that information, never spoken it aloud in the communications room. Then he continued. "In 12 hours, check the Barcelona Herald archives for May 16, 1976, page 14. The truth they couldn't completely erase." The transmission ended with what sounded like hundreds of voices whispering coordinates, those same coordinates, over and over, until I had to turn off the entire communications array just to make it stop. Once we docked in Barcelona, I was one of the first crew members off the ship. I went straight to the Barcelona Central Library, my heart pounding the entire metro ride there. The Barcelona Herald archives from 1976 were on microfilm in the basement, and it took me an hour to find May 16th. Page 14 was mostly shipping news and port schedules, but at the bottom corner, was a small article that made everything click into place. Pacific Star Ventures announces record insurance settlement. The article mentioned that the company had received the largest maritime insurance payout in history, following the loss of the Estrella Pacifica, enough to purchase an entire new fleet of state-of-the-art vessels with enhanced safety features. The amount was $450 million in 1976 money. But here's the detail that chilled me. The insurance claim had been filed on May 14th, a full day before the Estrella Pacifica sent its distress signal. I photographed everything, made copies, and sent them to 3 different journalists, 2 maritime safety organizations, and uploaded everything to multiple cloud servers. I knew my career with Meridian was over, but those voices deserved to be heard. Within a week of my documents going public, Meridian's stock plummeted 40%, and a joint investigation was launched by maritime authorities from 6 different countries. I was fired, of course, officially for violating company confidentiality agreements and causing reputational damage through unsubstantiated claims. But 2 months later, a team of deep-sea investigators found the Estrella Pacifica exactly at those coordinates, sitting upright on the ocean floor, with evidence of explosive damage to the hull that couldn't have been caused by any natural phenomenon. The investigation is still ongoing, but 3 board members have already resigned, and families of the victims have filed a class action lawsuit. I still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m., thinking I can hear those voices calling out from the dark waters of the Atlantic. I know it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but part of me wonders if they're still out there, waiting for full justice. I work as a freelance maritime safety consultant now, and I've made it my mission to ensure that no company can ever bury the truth, or people, like that again. Every time I cross the Atlantic, I always say a quiet prayer when we pass those coordinates. 27.4 north, 63.8 west. They may have been silenced in 1976, but not anymore. The Caribbean Princess wasn't my first choice for a vacation, but after my divorce was finalized in October 2023, my sister Nancy convinced me I needed to get away from everything. I was 34, working as a dental hygienist in Denver, and honestly just wanted to spend a week where nobody knew my story, or asked how I was holding up. The ship was massive, one of those floating cities with 7 restaurants, 3 pools, and enough activities to keep you busy 24 hours a day if you wanted. I'd been on board for 3 days when everything went sideways during what should have been the highlight of the trip. This sunset cocktail party they threw on the Lido deck every Wednesday. The brochure called it Golden Hour Celebration, and they'd been hyping it up since we left port in Miami. I remember exactly what I was wearing that evening. This ridiculous tropical print dress Nancy had bought me as a joke, with these bright yellow pineapples all over it. The party started around 6:30, and by 7, the deck was packed with probably 200 people, everyone holding these orange and pink drinks that came with little paper umbrellas and chunks of fresh mango on the rim. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting everything in these deep amber tones that made even strangers look like old friends. I was standing near the portside railing with this couple from Canada, the Andersons, who'd been at my dinner table the night before. We were laughing about how Mrs. Anderson's husband kept trying to convince her to enter the hairy chest contest when we heard this sound. Not quite a scream, more like a sharp intake of breath from about 50 people all at once. Everyone near the starboard railing was pointing and shouting, and I saw this 20-something guy in a backwards baseball cap climbing up on one of those white metal benches to get a better view. The music, some generic steel drum version of Margaritaville, kept playing for another 10 seconds before somebody finally cut it. That's when I heard the actual words people were yelling. "Man in the water! Someone went over! Stop the ship!" I pushed through the crowd, still holding my drink like an idiot, until I could see past the wall of backs pressed against the railing. There, in the churning wake maybe 40 feet behind us, was a person. Just a dark shape, really, arms flailing, getting smaller every second as the ship continued moving at full speed. The water around them was this sickening mix of white foam and deep blue, and I could see their head disappearing and reappearing between the waves our massive hull was creating. My first instinct was to throw something, a life preserver, anything. But when I looked around, all those safety rings that are usually hanging every 20 feet were somehow missing from their hooks. This woman next to me, wearing these huge cat-eye sunglasses even though the sun was almost down, was recording everything on her phone, holding it steady with both hands while tears streamed down her face. "We have to do something," she kept saying. But nobody moved. The crew members who'd been serving drinks 30 seconds earlier had vanished. I watched that person in the water for maybe another minute, the longest minute I've ever experienced, before they simply weren't there anymore. The spot where they'd been was just empty ocean, getting darker as the sun continued its descent like nothing had happened. The next 20 minutes were chaos. People were screaming at any crew member they could find, demanding the captain stop the ship, reverse course, call the Coast Guard, something. This older man with a thick Brooklyn accent grabbed a young server by the shoulders and just kept repeating, "There's a person back there, a human being." But the staff all had the same response. They needed to verify the incident through proper channels. They couldn't act on passenger reports alone. Protocol had to be followed. I watched 3 different people pull out their phones to call 911, only to remember we were in international waters with no cell service. The woman who'd been recording, whose name I learned was Bethany, was showing her video to anyone who would look, practically shoving her phone in crew members' faces. The footage was clear as day. You could see the person go over the railing during some kind of struggle or commotion near the bar, though the crowd had blocked most of the actual fall. By the time security showed up, maybe 30 minutes after it happened, they acted like we were all drunk or hysterical. The head of security, this enormous bald guy with arms like ham hocks and a name tag that said Chief Walker, announced that no incident had been reported through official channels. When about 40 of us started shouting at once, he held up his hand and said they'd review the ship's CCTV footage, but that passengers needed to return to their cabins or evening activities immediately. The party area was being closed for maintenance. I watched them herd everyone toward the exits while 2 crew members started folding up the bar and stacking chairs like they were closing a restaurant after a normal night. Bethany was standing her ground, still trying to show Chief Walker her video, when he finally took her phone, watched about 3 seconds and handed it back, saying he'd need her to file a formal report in the security office on deck 2. I went with Bethany to the security office because honestly, I didn't trust them not to do something to her if she went alone. The office was this windowless room behind the casino, reeking of cigarette smoke, even though smoking was supposedly banned indoors. We sat in these uncomfortable plastic chairs for an hour before anyone would talk to us. When someone finally came, a different security officer with acne scars and nervous eyes who wouldn't give his name, he had Bethany fill out this form that was clearly designed for reporting lost jewelry or noise complaints, not someone going overboard. She had to write the incident in a tiny box marked "Nature of Complaint." While she wrote, I noticed the officer kept glancing at this mounted camera in the corner of the room, the red recording light blinking steadily. Bethany tried to show him the video again, and this time he actually watched the whole thing, his face going pale when you could clearly see the person hitting the water. He said he'd need to make a copy for their investigation and asked for her room number so they could return her phone later. That was the first red flag I should have paid attention to. Why would they need to keep her phone to make a copy? But Bethany was exhausted and frustrated, and she just wanted someone to take this seriously, so she handed it over. The officer gave her a receipt on this flimsy piece of paper that looked like something from a grocery store, promised someone from senior staff would follow up within 24 hours, and ushered us out. When we got back to the main promenade, it was like stepping into an alternate universe. The nightly show was starting in the theater, people were laughing at the comedy club, and the casino was packed with seniors feeding dollar bills into slot machines. I heard 2 crew members near the photo shop talking in hushed voices, and I distinctly caught the words "standard procedure" and "Miami office," but they stopped the second they saw me looking. The next morning, I knocked on Bethany's cabin door around 8. She answered, looking like she hadn't slept at all, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Her phone had been returned, slid under her door at 3 a.m. according to the timestamp on the envelope. But when she opened her photo gallery to show me, her face went white. Every single video and photo from the previous day was gone. Not just the incident footage, but everything. The sunset pics she'd taken earlier, selfies from dinner, random shots of towel animals the steward had made. In their place were her photos from the previous days, but October 11th just didn't exist in her phone anymore. She showed me her recently deleted folder. Empty. She checked her cloud backup. The auto sync had mysteriously been turned off sometime during the night. When she went to her phone settings, the last backup was showing as October 10th at 11:47 p.m., even though she distinctly remembered checking Instagram in bed after midnight. We went straight back to the security office, but this time they had 2 large men in suits waiting outside who said the office was closed for administrative processing until further notice. Bethany started raising her voice, demanding to speak to Chief Walker, asking what they'd done to her phone. One of the suits, wearing mirrored sunglasses indoors like some movie villain, stepped forward and suggested in this very calm, very threatening tone that she might want to consider her safety and the safety of other passengers before making unsubstantiated accusations that could cause unnecessary panic. When I tried to intervene, saying I was a witness too, he turned those mirror lenses toward me and asked for my cabin number and full name. The way he wrote it down in this little leather notebook, taking his time with each letter, made my chest tight with fear. Bethany grabbed my arm and pulled me away, whispering that we needed to find the Andersons and anyone else who'd seen what happened. But finding witnesses proved harder than we expected. The Andersons weren't at breakfast, and when we went to their cabin, a steward cleaning the hallway mentioned they'd been relocated to a different deck due to a plumbing issue. The couple from Kentucky who'd been standing right next to us during the incident suddenly couldn't remember seeing anything clearly. The husband kept repeating that it had been getting dark. Maybe it was just debris or a dolphin. The woman with the cat-eye sunglasses who'd been crying. Nobody had seen her since last night. At lunch, I overheard a crew member telling another passenger that sometimes people think they see things at sea, that the light playing on the waves can create optical illusions, and that the ship had sensors that would automatically detect if anyone went overboard. This was a lie. I'd Googled it in the business center that morning. Those sensors exist, but most cruise ships don't have them because they're not legally required to. Around 3 that afternoon, Bethany texted me to come to her cabin immediately. When I got there, she was packing frantically, throwing clothes into her suitcase without folding them. She'd just gotten off the phone with her husband back home. She'd managed to call him from the ship's satellite phone at $8 a minute. She'd told him everything, and he'd said he was contacting a maritime lawyer and the Coast Guard. But here's the thing that made my skin prickle. Within 5 minutes of that call, she'd received a visit from the hotel director, the captain's direct representative, informing her that she was being confined to quarters for the remainder of the voyage due to safety concerns regarding her deteriorating mental state. They'd posted a security guard outside her door. I'd walked right past him, some 19-year-old kid who looked scared out of his mind. She had 1 hour to pack because they were moving her to what they called a supervised accommodation on Deck 1, which everyone knows is where they keep the morgue and the brig. I helped Bethany hide her passport and credit cards in her bra, and we came up with a plan. I would take photos of everything: the security guard, any documents they gave her, the room they put her in, and email them to her husband using the business center computers since my phone mysteriously stopped connecting to the ship's Wi-Fi after leaving the security office. But when I tried to leave her cabin, the guard blocked my path. He had a radio, and whatever voice crackled through it made him step aside, but not before telling me I had 10 minutes to return to my own cabin for a mandatory safety drill. There was no safety drill scheduled. I ran to the business center, but my keycard wouldn't open the door. The library, same thing. The customer service desk had a sign saying they were closed for staff training, even though it was the middle of their posted hours. Every single place where I could have contacted the outside world was suddenly inaccessible. I went back to my cabin and used the room phone to call my sister Nancy, but the call wouldn't connect to any number outside the ship. That night, they made an announcement that we'd be skipping our scheduled port in Cozumel due to unfavorable weather conditions, though the ocean was calm as glass. I never saw Bethany again. The next morning, her name wasn't on the dinner seating chart, and when I asked our waiter about her, he looked confused and said there had always been 7 people at our table, not 8. The Andersons were back, acting perfectly normal but refusing to make eye contact with me. On the last day, as we approached Miami, I was called to the purser's desk and informed that there had been an error with my onboard account. I was receiving a full refund for my cruise and a future cruise credit worth double what I'd paid. All I had to do was sign a simple form acknowledging the computer error and agreeing that my experience had been satisfactory despite the minor inconvenience. The form's fine print was extensive. I signed it. I was scared not to. But I took photos of every page with my phone, which had miraculously started working again once we were in U.S. waters. The man who went overboard was never mentioned in any news outlet. Bethany's social media accounts were deleted. When I tried to look her up 3 months later, it was like she'd never existed. But I know what I saw. We all saw it. And somewhere there's a cruise line policy written in corporate speak that explains exactly how to make these things disappear. The adults-only quiet pool on Deck 14 of the Pacific Voyager was supposed to be the easiest lifeguard assignment on the entire ship. That's what my supervisor told me when I got hired in early 2015, fresh out of getting my advanced water safety certification in Nevada. Most cruise passengers who chose that particular pool were in their 60s and 70s, preferring the peaceful atmosphere over the chaotic main pools below. They'd float on expensive inflatable loungers, sip their mojitos, and read paperback novels under the retractable glass canopy that kept the ocean breeze from disturbing their relaxation. I was 24 then, needed the money to pay off student loans, and figured watching retirees paddle around for 4 months at sea would be a decent way to save up while seeing parts of the Pacific I'd only dreamed about. My shift ran from noon to 8 p.m. every day, and for the first 2 weeks of that particular voyage in June, everything followed the same predictable pattern. Mrs. Fitzgerald would arrive at exactly 12:30 with her needlepoint, always choosing the same cushioned chair near the shallow end. Mr. and Mrs. Huang would claim their spot under the largest umbrella, where they'd play cards until dinner. A gentleman everyone called Professor Jim would swim precisely 40 laps, counting each one out loud in this raspy whisper that carried across the water. The pool had a capacity of maybe 50 people, but rarely saw more than 20 at a time, and most days I'd spend more time adjusting umbrellas and fetching extra towels than actually watching for any real emergencies. Things started getting weird on a Wednesday afternoon when I noticed this woman I'd never seen before hanging around the pool area. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat that covered most of her face. But what caught my attention wasn't her appearance. It was how she kept walking past the pool without ever getting in. She'd circle the deck maybe 3 or 4 times an hour, always slowing down near the storage room where we kept the pool chemicals and emergency equipment. Each time she passed, she'd glance at the keypad lock on the door, then quickly look away when she thought someone might be watching. I figured maybe she was just killing time or getting her steps in, but there was something deliberate about her movements, like she was memorizing the layout or timing something. That same evening, around 6 when most guests were heading to dinner, I saw her talking to one of the pool attendants, a guy named Rodrigo who'd been with the cruise line for years. They stood near the far corner of the deck, speaking in these hushed tones that didn't match the casual conversation you'd expect between crew and passengers. Rodrigo kept nodding and looking around nervously, and at one point, he pulled out his master key card and showed it to her briefly, before tucking it back into his pocket. When he noticed me watching from my lifeguard chair, he immediately ended the conversation and hurried away toward the crew stairs, while the woman simply adjusted her hat and strolled off like nothing had happened. The next morning, I arrived at the pool 30 minutes early to check the chlorine levels, part of my regular duties. The storage room door was slightly ajar, which was strange because it was supposed to lock automatically. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Chemicals on their shelves, rescue equipment hanging in place, the automatic pool cleaner coiled in the corner. But when I went to grab the testing kit from the back shelf, I noticed several small prescription bottles tucked behind a box of pH balancer. My first thought was that maybe another crew member had forgotten their medication, but when I picked one up, the label showed it was prescribed to a Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, one of our regular pool guests. The bottle was for Ambien and it was completely empty. Behind it were 4 more bottles, all different medications: Xanax, Valium, another Ambien, each prescribed to different elderly passengers I recognized from the pool, all empty. I stood there holding those bottles, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. These weren't medications someone would just accidentally leave in a storage room. The passengers whose names were on these labels were all frequent visitors to the quiet pool, all traveling alone or with equally elderly spouses. Mrs. Whitman specifically had mentioned to me just 2 days ago that she'd been feeling unusually drowsy lately, attributing it to seasickness even though the waters had been calm. The pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see. Someone was collecting these medications, but for what purpose? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Were they selling them, using them to sedate passengers? I carefully photographed each bottle with my phone before placing them back exactly where I'd found them, then locked the storage room and tried to act normal for the rest of my shift. That afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything except those bottles. Every elderly passenger at the pool suddenly seemed vulnerable, potential victims of whatever scheme was happening. Around 3 o'clock, I noticed Mrs. Whitman arrive for her usual swim, moving slower than normal, her eyes glazed and unfocused. She stumbled slightly getting into the pool and I had to steady her. "Thank you, dear," she said, her words slightly slurred. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately. Yesterday I woke up and my pearl necklace was on the nightstand instead of in the safe where I always put it. Must be getting forgetful." That detail sent a chill through me. Someone wasn't just stealing medications, they were using them to incapacitate passengers and access their rooms. The woman in the hat appeared again around 4, this time with a man I'd never seen before, tall and thin with acne scars across his cheeks. They sat at a table pretending to read magazines, but their eyes tracked every elderly guest who entered or left the pool area. I decided to follow Mrs. Whitman when she left at 5:30, keeping a safe distance as she made her way to the elevator. She pressed the button for Deck 9, where the premium cabins were located, and I watched the numbers climb before taking the stairs down. By the time I reached her floor, she was already at her door, struggling with her key card. A housekeeping cart sat abandoned in the hallway about 3 doors down, which was odd since housekeeping usually finished this deck by early afternoon. I pretended to check my phone while watching Mrs. Whitman finally get her door open and disappear inside. Less than a minute later, a housekeeper emerged from a supply closet near the abandoned cart, except she wasn't wearing the standard uniform quite right. The name tag was pinned too high, the shoes were wrong, and when she turned, I recognized her immediately. It was the woman from the pool, without her hat and sunglasses, pushing the cart directly toward Mrs. Whitman's room. My instinct was to confront her right there, but I knew I needed more proof than just suspicion. Instead, I ducked into an alcove near the ice machine and called security from my phone, whispering that I'd seen someone suspicious impersonating housekeeping on Deck 9. While waiting for them to arrive, I watched the fake housekeeper knock on Mrs. Whitman's door. When the elderly woman answered, I could hear the imposter's voice, unnaturally sweet and clear. "Housekeeping, ma'am. Just need to check your bathroom ventilation. There's been a problem with the system." Mrs. Whitman, still in her drowsy state, let her in without question. My heart pounded as I counted the seconds, knowing that security's response time on a ship this size could be 5 to 10 minutes. After about 3 minutes, the woman emerged, pushing her cart quickly toward the service elevator. I managed to snap a photo of her face just as the security officer rounded the corner. But by then, she'd already disappeared into the elevator, and the officer seemed more annoyed than concerned when I tried to explain what I'd witnessed. The security officer, a burly man with a thick Boston accent named Frank, listened to my story with barely concealed skepticism. He knocked on Mrs. Whitman's door to check on her, and she answered, seemingly fine but confused about why security was there. "Everything's perfectly all right," she assured us, though I noticed her jewelry box was open on the dresser behind her, and she kept touching her bare neck where her pearls usually hung. Frank asked if anything was missing, but Mrs. Whitman just laughed in that foggy way and said she'd probably misplaced them somewhere. After Frank left, dismissing the whole thing as a misunderstanding, I went back to my cabin and started documenting everything. The photos of the medicine bottles, the woman's face, the timeline of events. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I decided to go back to the pool deck to check if anyone was accessing the storage room after hours. The deck was supposed to be closed, but as I approached, I could see a thin beam of light coming from under the storage room door. I crept closer, hearing muffled voices from inside, at least 3 different people. Through a crack in the door, I could see Rodrigo, the woman from earlier, and the scarred man, plus 2 others I didn't recognize. They were sorting through prescription bottles, transferring pills into unmarked containers. The scarred man was counting cash, and I heard him mention cabin numbers and tomorrow's targets. "The Brennans in 9047, they'll be at the captain's dinner," he said. "And that widow in 9012, she takes her evening swim at 7 like clockwork." My phone was recording everything through the crack when suddenly someone grabbed my shoulder from behind. It was another accomplice I hadn't seen, a woman with bleached blonde hair and cold gray eyes. Before I could react or scream, she pressed something against my neck, a syringe, and whispered, "Should have minded your own business, pool boy." The last thing I remember was the deck spinning and my phone clattering across the floor as everything went dark. I woke up in the ship's medical center 12 hours later with the worst headache of my life, and the chief security officer, the captain, and 2 FBI agents standing around my bed. Turns out, my phone had uploaded everything to the cloud before I passed out, and my roommate, a bartender named Kevin, had reported me missing when I didn't show up for my morning shift. Security finally took it seriously and found me unconscious on the pool deck. The syndicate, because that's what it was, a organized crime ring that had been operating on cruise ships for months, had cleared out by then, but they'd left enough evidence behind in their rush to escape. 7 crew members and 3 passengers were eventually arrested at the next port. They'd been targeting elderly passengers on multiple cruise lines, stealing hundreds of thousands in cash and valuables. Mrs. Whitman's pearls alone were worth $40,000. The woman who drugged me got 15 years, and I had to testify via video link 6 months later. The cruise line offered me a settlement to keep quiet about their security failures, which I took. It paid off my student loans and then some. I never went back to lifeguarding after that summer. These days, I work at a bank in Nevada, and I still can't look at a swimming pool without remembering that thin beam of light under the door. The semester had been brutal at Northwestern, and when my roommate Blake suggested we blow our tax returns on a 7-day cruise for spring break, I jumped at the chance. It was March 2016, and the 6 of us, Blake, Megan, Josh, Samantha, Carlos, and myself, had pooled our money for adjoining cabins on the Atlantic Jewel, this massive ship that looked more like a floating city than anything that should reasonably exist on water. I was 21, studying journalism, always the one taking notes about everything, documenting our adventures with this old film camera my grandfather had given me. We'd been at sea for 2 days already, somewhere between Charleston and Bermuda, when everything started to unravel. The ship had 4,000 passengers, 14 decks, and more restaurants than our entire college town. But it was what happened on Deck 9, in the narrow hallway between the spa and the library, that turned our vacation into something I still can't fully comprehend. Something that makes me question whether cruise lines are hiding more than just their casino odds. I first noticed Amber. That wasn't her real name, but that's what the crew called her because of this striking amber pendant she always wore during the mandatory safety drill on day 1. She stood out because she was alone, maybe early 30s, with these thick reading glasses and a stack of books that she clutched like precious cargo, while everyone else was taking selfies in their life vests. She had this habit of writing constantly in a leather journal, sitting in the same corner booth of the breakfast buffet every morning at exactly 6:45 before the crowds arrived. I knew this because I'm an early riser, always have been since high school when I worked at my dad's bakery, and I'd grab coffee while watching the sunrise from the observation deck. Amber would nod at me each morning, this small acknowledgement between two people who understood that the best part of any day happens before most people open their eyes. She had cabin 9047 just 3 doors down from ours, and I'd sometimes hear her door click shut late at night when I was coming back from the 24-hour pizza place on deck 11. On Wednesday morning, our 3rd day at sea, Amber wasn't at her usual booth. The amber pendant sat on her table next to an untouched cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her journal open to a page covered in what looked like ship deck blueprints she'd sketched herself. I remembered thinking she must have gone to the bathroom, maybe felt seasick. The waves had been rough the night before, these 12-foot swells that made the chandelier in the main atrium swing like a hypnotist's watch. But when I came back an hour later with Blake and Megan for a proper breakfast, everything was still there, untouched. The busboy, this kid named Tommy from the Philippines who always remembered everyone's coffee order, was standing near the table looking confused. He told us she never left her stuff like that she treated that journal like it contained state secrets, always tucked it under her arm even when she went to refill her orange juice. By lunch, her things had been cleared away, and when we asked the restaurant manager about it, he just shrugged and said she probably went on one of the shore excursions, even though we weren't scheduled to dock until the next morning. That afternoon, Carlos and I decided to check on her. We figured maybe she was sick, needed someone to bring her some of those seasickness bags from the medical center. When we got to cabin 9047, the door was slightly open, this narrow gap that showed only darkness inside. The housekeeping cart was parked outside, but no staff anywhere, which was weird because they always worked in pairs on this ship, some kind of safety protocol they'd mentioned during orientation. I knocked, called out asking if everything was okay, and when no one answered, I pushed the door open wider. The cabin was pristine, bed made with those fancy towel animals the crew created every day. Hers was a swan with sunglasses, but all of Amber's belongings were still there. Her clothes hung in the closet, organized by color like some kind of rainbow gradient. Her medication bottles lined up on the bathroom counter. Even her passport sat on the nightstand next to a half-eaten chocolate from the evening turn-down service. But the strangest thing was her laptop, still open and powered on, displaying what looked like hundreds of photos of empty corridors and stairwells throughout the ship, all time-stamped from the past 2 days, all showing these specific spots where the ceiling had these dark domes. Security cameras. Carlos grabbed my arm and pointed at the screen. There was a folder labeled Blind Spots with a file inside that mapped out every area on the ship where cameras couldn't see. Deck 9 had the most gaps, especially near the maintenance doors and this weird section behind the spa, where the crew had built a temporary wall for renovations. Before we could look closer, we heard footsteps in the hallway, that distinct sound of hard-soled shoes that security officers wore. We quickly left the cabin, trying to look casual, but the head of security, Mr. Garrison, was already there with 2 other officers. He had this way of smiling that never reached his eyes, just his mouth moving while the rest of his face stayed frozen like those old portraits in the ship's history display. He asked what we were doing, and when we explained about Amber being missing, he pulled out a tablet and showed us a log entry. A. Fitzgerald disembarked at Port Charlestown, 11:47 a.m. I told him that was impossible since we were still at sea, hadn't docked anywhere, and Port Charlestown wasn't even on our itinerary. His smile got wider, and he said I must be confused about the schedule, that sometimes the salt air makes passengers lose track of time, then suggested we enjoy the pool deck since it was such a beautiful day. That evening, our whole group gathered in Josh and Carlos's cabin to discuss what we'd seen. Samantha, who was studying computer science, had managed to take photos of Amber's laptop screen with her phone before we left, and when she zoomed in, we could see something disturbing. The metadata on Amber's photos showed they were taken with a camera that had been reported stolen from another passenger 2 weeks earlier, on a completely different cruise. Blake pulled up the ship's public Facebook page on his phone, scrolling through thousands of photos from previous voyages, and there she was, Amber, or someone who looked exactly like her, in the background of at least 12 different cruises over the past year, always alone, always carrying that same leather journal. But in each photo, she had a different name on her cruise badge: Rebecca, Diana, Melissa, always working her way through the ship, always taking pictures. Megan suggested we report this to someone, maybe the FBI when we docked, but Josh pointed out something that made us all go quiet. In 3 of those photos, there were news articles in the comments about passengers who had gone missing on those exact cruises, always solo travelers, always supposedly disembarked at ports the ships never actually visited. The next morning I woke up at 5:30 to find Blake's bed empty, his sheets twisted into a tight spiral like he'd been grabbed while sleeping. His phone was still on the nightstand playing the same song on repeat, this old jazz tune his mom loved that he used as an alarm. But the volume was turned down so low you could barely hear it. His camera bag was gone, though, the expensive one his parents had bought him for his photography minor, and there were wet footprints leading from his bed to our balcony door, which was locked from the inside with the safety latch still engaged. I ran to Josh and Carlos's cabin, pounding on their door until they stumbled out half asleep, and we searched everywhere Blake might go for sunrise photos. The observation deck, the jogging track, even that secret spot near the crew quarters where you could see dolphins if you got up early enough. Nothing. When we went to security, Mr. Garrison was already there, waiting for us with that same frozen smile, holding Blake's camera bag. He said Blake had been found trying to access restricted areas near the engine room and had been placed in what he called temporary detention for the safety of other passengers, that we could see him when we docked. But when I looked at the camera bag, the serial number was different from Blake's. I knew because I'd helped him register it for insurance just 2 months ago. We spent the rest of that morning mapping out every blind spot Amber had documented, using Samantha's programming skills to overlay the ship's official deck plans with the photos from Amber's laptop. There were 17 areas where someone could disappear without being seen by cameras, and most of them connected to service corridors that ran parallel to the passenger areas, like a hidden circulatory system inside the ship's walls. Megan had started recording everything on her phone, creating what she called evidence files, when she discovered something in the background of one video, a reflection in a window that showed 2 crew members carrying what looked like a body bag through one of those blind spots, but the timestamp showed it was from 3 hours in the future. We realized her phone's clock had somehow been changed, or the ship's internal time system was being manipulated. Carlos wanted to confront the captain directly, but Josh stopped him, showing us something he'd found in the ship's terms and conditions that we'd all agreed to when we booked. A clause stating that in international waters, the cruise line had full authority over passenger detention and could relocate passengers to alternative accommodations for safety violations without prior notice or consent. That afternoon, we decided to test something. Samantha had noticed that all the missing passengers, including Amber, had one thing in common. They'd all ordered room service between 2 and 4 a.m. on the night before they vanished. The menu items were always the same: chamomile tea, wheat crackers, and something called Chef's Special Supplement, which wasn't listed on any menu we could find. I volunteered to place the exact same order that night, but the others refused to let me do it alone. Instead, we set up a buddy system. I'd place the order while Samantha hid in the bathroom with her phone recording. Megan would be on our balcony watching through the glass door, and Josh and Carlos would wait in the hallway, pretending to be drunk and lost. At 2:17 a.m., I called room service and asked for the specific items. The woman on the phone paused for so long I thought the line had disconnected, then asked for my cabin number twice, like she was verifying something on a list. 20 minutes later, there was a knock. Not the usual cheerful room service announcement, but just 3 slow, deliberate knocks. When I opened the door, it wasn't the usual room service uniform, but 2 men in maintenance coveralls, one holding a tray with a silver dome cover that seemed too large for tea and crackers. The bigger one kept trying to look past me into the room, while the other insisted I needed to sign a special dietary waiver for the supplement, his hand strategically covering most of the text on the form. I pretended to read the waiver while Samantha texted frantically from the bathroom. She could see through the door crack that there was a 3rd person in the hallway, just out of my view, holding what looked like zip tie restraints. I suddenly claimed I'd changed my mind, that my stomach felt queasy from the waves, and tried to close the door, but the bigger man wedged his foot against it. He said I'd already been charged for the order, that it would be wasteful not to take it, his voice flat and mechanical like he was reading from a script. That's when Carlos and Josh stumbled around the corner, playing their drunk act perfectly, singing some ridiculous college fight song and asking the maintenance guys for directions to the casino. The moment of distraction was enough. I slammed the door shut and engaged the deadbolt, hearing muffled arguing in the hallway. Through the peephole, I watched the 3rd person step into view, and I recognized him immediately. It was Tommy, the busboy from the breakfast restaurant, but his friendly demeanor was completely gone, replaced by something cold and calculating as he spoke rapidly into a radio in a language I didn't recognize. They stayed outside our door for another 10 minutes, occasionally testing the handle, before finally leaving. The next morning came with an announcement that made everyone's blood chill. The captain's voice, usually warm and jovial, was replaced by Mr. Garrison speaking in that same flat tone the maintenance men had used. He announced that due to a medical situation, the ship would be making an unscheduled stop at a private facility island for passenger wellness evaluations, and that all guests should remain in their cabins until called by deck number. Through our balcony, we could see this island that hadn't been there the night before, or maybe it had been, but covered in morning fog, with a concrete dock and white buildings that looked more like warehouses than any medical facility. Samantha checked her GPS, but it showed we were somehow still in the exact coordinates from yesterday, like the island didn't exist on any map. That's when Megan noticed something horrifying on her phone. All the videos she'd recorded were slowly corrupting, the files deteriorating in real time, pixels dissolving like acid eating through digital evidence. She quickly uploaded what she could to 3 different cloud services using the ship's Wi-Fi, but the upload bars weren't moving, stuck at 0% like the data was being intercepted. We had to make a decision, stay in our cabins and wait to be evaluated, or try to find Blake and get to the lifeboats we'd located in one of Amber's blind spots, the ones that weren't on any official safety diagram. We chose to run. Using Amber's map, we navigated through the service corridors, these narrow metal passages that smelled like rust and industrial cleaner, where the elegant cruise ship facade disappeared completely. We found Blake on deck 3, in a medical bay that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't on any deck plan, strapped to a gurney with an IV drip of something clear that made his pupils look like pinpoints. He was conscious but couldn't speak, just kept blinking in this pattern that Josh recognized as Morse code from his Eagle Scout days. DONTTRUSTWATER. We unstrapped him, and Carlos practically carried him as we made our way to the hidden lifeboats. But when we got there, we found we weren't alone. 17 other passengers were already there, all clutching their belongings, all solo travelers who'd figured out the truth. One of them, an older woman named Gladys who'd been a naval engineer, had already prepped the boat for launch. She said she'd been watching these ships for years, tracking disappearances, that this wasn't about robbery or ransom but something else, something about testing how people react to certain stimuli in isolation. that the supplement was just the latest experiment. As we lowered the lifeboat, alarms started blaring and we could see crew members running toward us, but it was too late. We hit the water hard, the motor started on the first try, and we sped away from that floating laboratory disguised as paradise. The Coast Guard found us 8 hours later, 23 people crammed into a lifeboat meant for 15, about 40 miles off the coast of Virginia. Blake had started recovering once we got away from the ship, though he couldn't remember anything after going to bed that night. Just vague sensations of being moved through corridors and voices speaking in languages that sounded familiar but wrong, like English played backwards. When we told the Coast Guard officers about the Atlantic Jewel and showed them what little evidence we had left, some corrupted videos, Samantha's screenshots, our testimonies, they exchanged these looks that told us this wasn't the first time they'd heard this story. The officer in charge, Commander Briggs, took our statements separately, asking specific questions about the blind spots, the room service patterns, the mysterious island. He told us off the record that there had been similar reports from 6 different cruise lines over the past 3 years, always the same pattern, but by the time authorities investigated, the ship's logs showed nothing unusual. Passengers listed as disembarked had their credit cards used at ports days later, and any physical evidence had mysteriously vanished. The Atlantic Jewel, according to their records, had reported us as medical evacuations due to a severe norovirus outbreak, complete with fabricated medical records and witness statements from passengers we'd never met. We never found out what happened to Amber, if that was even her real name, or if she was another investigator who got too close to the truth. The cruise line offered us full refunds and free cruises for life if we signed NDAs, which our lawyers told us were so ironclad that even mentioning the company's name publicly could result in lawsuits that would destroy us financially. We didn't sign. Instead, we started a website documenting cruise disappearances, using pseudonyms and being careful never to name specific companies, but providing enough details that other potential victims could recognize the patterns. Blake never fully recovered his memory of that night, but sometimes he'll smell something, always industrial cleaner mixed with salt air, and have panic attacks. Samantha managed to recover one video from a cached file on her phone, just 12 seconds of footage showing that reflection in the window, and she spent the past 8 years trying to enhance it, convinced there's something in those pixels that will explain everything. The Atlantic Jewel still operates, though under a different name now, and every few months we get emails from people who've read our site, saying they recognize the signs and got off at the next port. That's the only victory we have, knowing that maybe we've helped some people avoid whatever was supposed to happen in those blind spots, in those hidden medical bays, on islands that don't exist on any map. I had just turned 61 a few months before the trip, and that cruise was supposed to be my small celebration, a reward to myself after 4 decades in the healthcare system. I'd worked as a nurse in everything from pediatric wards to hospice units, and finally retired from a private clinic in Sacramento. The cruise was a 12-day South American route, starting in Valparaiso, and scheduled to loop around a few coastal cities before ending in Buenos Aires. I was traveling alone, something I actually enjoyed. I liked the quiet, the anonymity, the chance to read in peace without anyone needing a thermometer or a morphine adjustment. The first few days were exactly what I hoped for: warm breezes, lazy mornings on the observation deck, and a book in one hand with a cocktail in the other. Things started shifting on the 5th day. I remember because I'd just finished breakfast and gone down to deck 4 to browse the small onboard library. As I walked past the elevators, I noticed a man, mid-40s, thin, sunburnt, doubled over on one of the benches, coughing into his shirt sleeve. I almost kept walking, but something about the sound made me pause. It wasn't your standard dry cough. It had weight to it, like there was liquid in his lungs. A few feet away, a woman, maybe his partner, sat with her arms crossed, nervously glancing around, as if hoping no one else would notice them. I gave it a second look, shrugged it off and kept going. I wish I hadn't. By lunchtime, I started seeing it everywhere. People sneezing, coughing harshly, leaning against walls looking dizzy. In the buffet line, one elderly man had to sit down suddenly with a napkin pressed to his mouth. Another guest quietly helped him back to his room. But no announcements were made. No notes slipped under cabin doors. No intercom messages. Nothing. I figured maybe it was norovirus. Those can sweep through cruise ships like wildfire. But this didn't feel like stomach bugs. It was all respiratory, and more passengers were visibly unwell. I asked one of the staff near the coffee station if medical was aware. She gave me a weird smile, nodded and told me everything was under control. That was the first time I felt something was being hidden. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I stepped out onto my balcony just to breathe in the ocean air. That's when I saw 2 crew members, both wearing surgical masks and gloves, pushing a cart covered in black plastic down the corridor across from mine. One of them looked over his shoulder more than once, like he was making sure no one was watching. I ducked back into my room and shut off the light. I've seen that kind of behavior in hospital lockdown drills. It wasn't about precaution. It was containment. That next morning, whole sections of Deck 5 were blocked off with velvet ropes and signs saying maintenance. But I'd walked those halls the day before. There was nothing under maintenance. I decided to speak with someone at the front desk, not to make a scene, just to ask directly if there was an outbreak on board. The woman behind the counter had that cruise line polish to her. Smile practiced, voice smooth. When I asked if there had been a spike in illness, she didn't flinch. She told me the captain was aware, and that the crew was taking proactive steps to ensure the health and safety of all guests. No mention of what the illness was, no mention of quarantine procedures, and absolutely no effort to even pretend it wasn't happening. I asked if the doctor was available. She said he was very busy at the moment, but rest assured, he's been briefed. That phrase, been briefed, didn't sit right with me. I wasn't looking for military jargon. I wanted a medical answer. I spent the afternoon trying not to obsess. I watched some movies in the little theater, read on the pool deck, even attended a trivia game. But the coughing kept following me. Every room I entered, someone had that same deep, hacking sound, like they were coughing from the bottom of their ribs. By dinner, the staff started wearing masks too. That's when I knew they weren't expecting this to blow over. I asked my waiter, a young guy named Mateo who had served me twice already, if he knew what was going on. His eyes darted toward the hallway before he whispered, "They told us not to say anything, but the doctor's been seeing over 40 people a day." That confirmed it. Whatever was spreading was real, and it was bad. The next morning I noticed we were still at sea, way past the point we were supposed to dock in Montevideo. No announcement, no explanation, just floating. I asked a woman at breakfast if she'd heard anything. She hadn't. Later that afternoon, I went up to the fitness center to walk a bit, and the windows gave a good view of the ocean. No land in sight. I started talking to other passengers, quietly comparing what we'd seen and heard. Turns out I wasn't alone. A man from Oregon told me he saw a crew member sealing off an entire hallway on Deck 6 with plastic tarps. Another woman said she was told not to leave her cabin for the day as a precaution. The pieces weren't adding up. We were being kept out here on purpose, and nobody was admitting it. That night the hallways got quieter. Not just calmer, eerily silent. The usual shuffle of sandals, the low murmur of conversation, all of it gone. Around midnight, I heard the soft hiss of a walkie-talkie just outside my cabin door. I peeked through the peephole. 2 security staff stood there, both masked, one holding a clipboard and the other with some kind of electronic reader. They scanned something on the door across from mine, tapped a few buttons, and moved on. The next morning, the door they'd scanned had a white sticker on it with a bold red line through it. I walked by slowly, trying not to look suspicious, and noticed the room number had been blacked out. There was no nameplate, no "Do Not Disturb" sign, nothing. Just that sticker, like someone had erased the cabin from the system. On day 9, they finally made an announcement. Not over the intercom, but as a printed letter slid under our doors. It said we'd be extending our voyage due to a logistical delay with port access, and that all amenities would remain available. No mention of illness, no mention of sick passengers, just a thin excuse wrapped in hospitality fluff. I watched people read the letter in the hallway, some confused, others clearly panicked. An older couple across from me started packing their bags anyway, even though we had nowhere to go. It was clear the staff were following a script, a very specific one. And it wasn't for our benefit, it was to contain panic. By then, I'd started keeping to myself. I only left my room for food, and I avoided the lower decks entirely. One night I made the mistake of taking the stairs after the elevator stalled. I passed one of the sealed corridors, this time with 2 armed guards standing in front of it. Armed, on a luxury cruise ship. They didn't say a word, but they watched me closely as I passed. That moment cemented what I already suspected. This wasn't just a bad flu or an overreaction. They were isolating people, possibly detaining them, and the rest of us were being kept distracted just enough to stay cooperative. We weren't passengers anymore. We were inventory. On day 11, we finally docked in a small port, not the original one listed on the itinerary. We weren't allowed to disembark until local officials boarded the ship. I saw them come on wearing hazmat suits, not masks, full suits. They inspected several cabins, including one of the sealed ones, and then spoke with the captain privately. Hours later, we were let off the ship one group at a time, with no explanation. Just a screening tent and instructions to head directly to the terminal. No stopping. I asked one of the men in uniform what the illness was. He didn't even look at me, just pointed to the exit. I still don't know what exactly happened on that cruise. I heard rumors, pneumonia clusters, some kind of respiratory virus that hadn't been disclosed yet. A few forums mentioned something about a containment protocol called Code Orange, but nothing official ever came out. No reports, no media stories, just silence. I think about that trip more than I want to admit. How quickly things changed, how fast we went from guests to something else entirely. I came home healthy somehow, but I've never taken another cruise. I don't think I ever will.